Three thugs thought they were bullying a random waitress. What they were actually doing was detonating a bomb under their own lives. Because the woman they tore apart in public was married to the one man in town no one wanted to see walk through that door. But here's the twist that makes this story insane. Her husband didn't destroy them. She did. Not with revenge, not with rage, with mercy. And somehow that hit harder than any punishment ever could. This is the kind of story that leaves you asking one terrifying question. If he hadn't walked in, would anyone else have stood up for her?
Feels. It is late. The kind of hour where the world feels heavy and only the broken are still awake. Picture this fading roadside diner, neon flickering against the dark window. Inside, three loudmouths are laughing, feels, high on the cheap thrill of tearing a waitress's uniform. They think they are the kings of the night, utterly blind to the nightmare they just woke from its slumber. They do not know her husband is Mateo Marquez, the Black Lion, feels, a literal ghost forged in the darkest fires of the underworld. When the front door chimes, all that fake bravado spills onto the linoleum floor. True power does not need to scream, my friends, feels. You and I both know the loudest guy in the room is usually just masking his own weakness, feels. The heavy thud of a coffee pot hitting the floor echoes through the room, shattering the quiet. The entire diner freezes in a breathless panic. Lina Marquez stands by booth 7, her trembling fingers holding the ripped edges of her dress together, feels, while these fools howl like wild dogs. Every other soul in the room is paralyzed by the sudden violence, but here is the tragic irony hiding beneath Lina's shock. She already knows what these strangers do not. In a matter of minutes, feels, these arrogant men will be nothing but a memory. You simply cannot act like a monster and expect to outrun the consequences of your cruelty. This brutal vendetta sets itself into motion just as the shadows swallow the lonely highway outside, feels. At 31, Lina moves through the world with a fragile, hard-won peace. She wears that faded pink uniform like a shield, offering soft smiles to help the weary travelers forget their own troubles. To anyone passing through, feels, she is just a kind soul-pouring decaf, but her gentleness was born in the fires of literal hell. If you look closely, her eyes carry the dark, heavy exhaustion of loving a man who ruled the streets. She is just wiping down the Formica counter, feels, desperately trying to keep her trauma asleep, when the door chimes and shatters her fragile sanctuary. We try so hard to bury the past, but the dirt is never deep enough. The ghosts we run from are always just waiting for the perfect moment to return, feels. Look at the men who just sealed their own grim fate. They kick the glass door open, their laughter loud and desperate, carving out space they do not deserve. The leader struts like he owns the shadows, while his two shadows bark hollow, cruel jokes, feels. He snaps his fingers at Lina, treating her like dust beneath his boots. Yet, Lina does not flinch. She grips the laminated menus with a hollow, practiced calm. She learned long ago that giving a tyrant your fear is exactly what feeds them, feels. Her absolute silence, that frozen composure, deeply fractures their fragile pride. The heavy-set man beside the leader twists his face into an ugly sneer, furious that he cannot break her spirit. True strength always enrages the weak, feels. They drop into the center booth, taking up the space just to make the room shrink for everyone else. The air grows incredibly heavy. The regulars shrink into their jackets, staring blindly at their cold plates. Back by the grill, feels. Old Jimmy wipes nervous sweat from his brow. When Lina steps up with her notepad, the leader spits out a cruel insult, practically begging for her to crack. They treat her like discarded trash, laughing at her quiet dignity, feels. You and I have seen this kind of cruelty before. Picking on the helpless is just a desperate cry from a hollow soul. They push and they push, feels, entirely blind to the tragic reality that they are calling down the wrath of a man who deals exclusively in sorrow and blood, feels. The tension stretches until it is ready to snap. Through the barrage of vile words, Lina remains a statue of ice. She takes the verbal blows without blinking because she has survived the terrifying storms of a mob enforcer's world, feels. One of the men leans in, mocking her silence, asking if she is too slow to understand the threat. The leader, drowning in his own inadequacy because he cannot make her tremble, finally loses control. He seizes her wrist with a bruising grip, feels, demanding she show him respect. But true courage is staying planted when the wind howls. Lina asks him very softly to release her. Instead, he crosses the point of no return, yanking her collar until the thin fabric tears open against her chest. Heels. The sharp sound of tearing cloth rings out, hanging in the dead air. The diner plunges into a suffocating terror, yet Lena stands unmovable. An elderly woman in the third booth gasps, covering her mouth. A tired truck driver shifts his weight, heels, eyes flashing with a desperate urge to intervene, while Jimmy drops his metal spatula. But Lena does not scream. She just takes a slow, heavy breath. The leader smiles with a twisted satisfaction, drunk on a counterfeit power, heels. The entire room is frozen in dread, but she remains silent. In her mind, she has already crossed over into a grim reality, calculating the absolute devastation these foolish men just summoned. Ignorance is the most dangerous poison a man can swallow. Heels. The delicate chime of the front door slices through the heavy silence. Mateo Marquez steps inside, and the temperature in the room seems to plummet into freezing dark. He wears simple clothes, heels, but the suffocating aura of a seasoned killer rolls off his shoulders. His dark eyes sweep the floor and instantly anchor onto his wife, taking in her torn dress and the quiet tremor in her hands. The truck driver recognizes the heavy, heels, deliberate walk of an apex predator and immediately flattens his palms on the table, completely surrendering to the inevitable. Jimmy slips silently into the back room, but those three men? Utterly oblivious. Heels. Pure arrogance blinds you to the Reaper standing right at your shoulder until the scythe falls. Heels. Mateo settles onto a corner stool, perfectly still, his hollow gaze locked onto the center booth. When he finally speaks, his voice is a rough whisper that slices through the diner like a razor blade. He simply says her name, asking her to come to him. Heels. This is the quiet, devastating gravity of a man who commands life and death. Lena walks over, her posture straight, leaving the cruel men behind. The entire room is holding its breath, waiting for the sky to fall. In a single heartbeat, heels. The power in the room violently shifts to the quiet man sitting in the shadows. The leader's smug grin finally falters, the cold realization of his mistake creeping into his bones. We rarely recognize the edge of the cliff until we are already falling. Heels. The bully, desperate to salvage his crumbling pride, pushes his chest out and barks a challenge at Mateo. It is genuinely tragic watching a doomed man try to assert his dominance. Mateo gives him nothing. Total, crushing silence. Heels. He does not even shift his gaze. Instead, he reaches out, his rough fingers brushing Lena's cheek, feeling the slight tremor in her jaw. He asks if she is hurt, his tone terrifyingly soft and even. She whispers a quiet no. But their eyes meet, heels, carrying the weight of 1,000 violent nights. You and I know he is not just asking for her well-being. That simple question is the final seal on a dark promise. When a man built on violence loves you, his devotion is written in absolute devastation. Heels. To understand the storm brewing in this diner, we have to look back at the wreckage of Mateo's past. Years ago, he sat on the throne of the Marquez crime syndicate. He governed the streets with an iron fist and a ruthless, unspoken code. Lena, heels, possessing a heart too large for her own good, looked past the blood on his hands and saw a deeply broken boy in need of saving. She believed her love could wash his sins away. It is a fatal mistake we often make, heels, thinking our light can cure another's darkness. She fell completely, blinding herself to the trail of bodies he left behind, desperate to mend his fractured soul. Heels. She anchored her entirely soft life to a man whose very existence was rooted in breaking the world apart. Heels. The grim truth of the underworld is that the past refuses to stay buried in the dirt. Their quiet illusion of a normal life shattered during a bitter, freezing night. 15 armed rivals ambushed his crew under the guise of a peace treaty. Heels. It was a chaotic symphony of gunfire and shattered glass. When the dawn finally broke, Mateo was gone without a trace. For 8 agonizing months, the streets whispered that the Black Lion had finally fallen. Lena was completely destroyed, heels, retreating to this roadside diner to mourn a love that was both beautiful and toxic. Sometimes, being the one left behind hurts far more than the bullet. But the ghost has returned to the world of the living, heels, and his eyes are fixed on the men who dared to harm his wife, heels. Under the flickering fluorescent lights of this diner, a terrifying truth is coming to the surface. Monsters never truly fade away. They merely rest in the shadows until they are called. Years ago, Mateo collapsed at Lena's front door, heels, his body broken by fire and betrayal. He was a phantom crawling back to his only remaining sanctuary. They shared a profound, agonizing trauma bond, and he confessed that without her light, his mind would fully collapse into darkness. So, heels, they tried to play a quiet game of pretend. Lena poured coffee to forget the scent of gunpowder. But here is the cruel reality. You can change your name and hide away, but you can never wash away the killer instinct of a desperate man. Feels, it is always waiting in the dark. Feels. Let us watch this tragedy unfold together. This lonely diner kept the chaos at bay for 3 long years, but peace is always a temporary visitor. Mateo rises slowly from his stool, and the very air in the room turns to ice. Feels. He moves toward the booth with the silent, terrifying grace of a predator who has cornered his prey. The loudmouth suddenly feels the crushing weight of his mistake, stammering out a pathetic excuse about just having a little fun. Feels. His 2 friends look ready to jump out of their own skin. Mateo stops at the edge of their table, his eyes empty black pools. He delivers a single, quiet command. Stand up. The bully is frozen in place. It is a harsh lesson, is it not? Feels. The loudest bark always turns into a whimper when the real wolf arrives. Feels. I said stand up. Mateo does not raise his voice, nor does he blink. He radiates the chilling calm of a man who has dug more graves than he can count. That absolute emptiness in his gaze makes the bully's hands tremble violently against the sticky table. Feels. The man forces himself to his feet, trying desperately to project a courage he does not possess. Mateo's voice drops, thick with quiet menace. Then you never should have touched her. In that agonizing pause, Feels. The old trucker leans in from the neighboring booth, his face completely drained of color, and whispers a single name. The thug's expression shatters into pure horror. You are the Black Lion, he gasps. A man can bury his past, Feels, but his legend will always claw its way back to the surface. Feels. The stocky man scrambles backward, his elbow catching a glass that shatters loudly across the worn tiles. His companion is already sliding out, eyes locked on the exit. Mateo allows a faint, hollow smile to touch his lips. Feels. Now you are beginning to understand. The leader's hands shake uncontrollably as his hollow bravado melts into sheer, suffocating terror. We didn't know, he stammers, begging for mercy he has not earned. We wouldn't have. Mateo steps closer, Feels, trapping him in his own fear. Wouldn't have what? Humiliated her? Torn her clothes? His whisper holds the diner hostage. You preyed on her because you thought she was alone, but the truth always remains. Feels. Cowards only ever show their teeth when they believe the dark is completely empty. Feels. Picture this. The diner is thick with dread, the kind that makes it hard to breathe. The loudest thug in the room is suddenly choking on his own rising panic. He stammers out a pathetic excuse, begging Mr. Marquez, Feels, swearing they had no idea who the woman was. But Mateo just cuts him off. His voice is a chilling, quiet murmur that cuts right through the greasy air. He tells the boy that if they had known, Feels, they simply would have found a different victim, someone without a veteran hitman standing in their shadow. Mateo tilts his head, dissecting the street punk's soul. The bully freezes, completely stripped of his fake armor. Feels. Mateo simply points to the worn leather booth and commands him to sit. Sometimes you only discover what a man is really made of when his fragile power is finally broken. Feels. The diner falls into a heavy, suffocating silence. You and I have seen this happen before, haven't we? The only sound left is the faint hum of the neon sign in the window. Mateo leans back against the cracked leather, Feels, sitting with a terrifying stillness meant to unravel their nerves completely. He asks a haunting question. What exactly did they see when they walked in tonight? The young leader swallows hard, staring at his own trembling hands, Feels, muttering that he only saw a waitress. But Mateo presses deeper, demanding the ugly truth. The youngest thug cracks under the immense weight, admitting they thought she looked soft. Mateo repeats the word like a final verdict, Feels. It is a tragic reality of this dark world. Cruel men constantly mistake a woman's hard-earned peace for a weakness to exploit. Feels. The defeated thug drops his gaze. He knows there is no escape. Mateo taps a single finger against the table, and all 3 boys flinch as if a revolver just went off. His deep baritone fills the quiet, carrying the heavy scars of his underworld past. Feels. He tells them that when he looks at her, he sees a woman who walked barefoot through hell. He sees a shattered heart that painfully rebuilt a quiet life from nothing but ashes. Mateo calls her stronger than all of them combined. Feels. The gang leader is fully unraveling now, sobbing out desperate apologies and offering money to fix the mess. But we all know the bitter truth about moments like this. When a cruel man begs for forgiveness while staring down his own demise, Feels, he is never truly sorry for his sins. He is only terrified of the fast-approaching consequences. Feels. Mateo lets a cold laugh escape his chest. He asks if they genuinely believe this is about some crumpled dollar bills. His voice sharpens into a blade, and the ruthless mafia ghost underneath finally reveals itself. Heals. He reminds them they violated her only sanctuary, and no amount of cash can buy back a stolen sense of security. The stocky thug breaks down into ugly, desperate tears, begging to know what they must do to survive. Heals. Mateo lets the heavy silence stretch out, letting their raw terror marinate. He turns his dark eyes toward Lena, who stands beneath the flickering fluorescent bulbs, wrapping her arms around her own shoulders. He softly asks her what she wants. Heals. It is a profound lesson in human nature. The loudest voices in the room always belong to the most fragile souls once the illusion of their control is finally stripped away. Heals. When your life is tangled up with a former underworld king, the currency of revenge changes. Lena does not want these boys buried in the cold earth, nor does she want their blood staining the floors of her hard-won diner. Heals. She simply wants them to drown in the exact same helpless terror they forced upon her. Her eyes are utterly empty, of what that makes the thugs choke on their own guilt. Mateo senses her silent judgment. He understands the deeply tragic bond they share, Heals, and he honors her quiet choice. Leaning close enough to shatter the last fragments of their egos, he raises his scarred hand and snaps his fingers. It reminds us all what absolute power truly looks like. Heals. True dominance is never found in a raised voice or a thrown fist. It lives entirely in the devastating, breathless silence right before the storm finally breaks over you. Heals. That single snap cracks through the diner like thunder. This is where the shadows finally come to life. From the darkest booth, two imposing figures slowly step into the blue neon glow. One is a weathered veteran of the streets, Heals, and the other is an enforcer built like a mountain of stone. They move with the terrifying silence of starving wolves circling cornered prey. The color entirely drains from the street punks as the gravity of their fatal mistake crashes down. Heals. Mateo's anger is gone now, replaced by an agonizing clinical calm. He quietly promises Lena that not a single drop of blood will ruin her floors tonight. They are merely taking a walk to the back alley. It is a brutal lesson we often learn too late. Heals. Arrogance will always blind you to the quiet, heavy hitters patiently waiting in the darkest corners of the room. Heals. The turning of the tide is always a painful thing to witness. The heavy-set boy is openly sobbing now, tears streaming down his face as he screams about the family waiting for him at home. Mateo simply stares at him, his dark eyes filled with absolute Heals, freezing disgust. He leans in, voice dripping with sorrow, and asks why family did not matter when he pushed another man's love against the wall just moments ago. As the enforcers step forward to collect their prize, Heals, the youngest boy gives in to pure panic. He makes a blind, clumsy sprint for the diner door. But terror is a heavy weight to carry. The older hitman smoothly steps into his path, seizing the boy's arm with a bone-crushing grip. Heals. They drag him out into the freezing night. Attempting to outrun your own dark sins only guarantees a much more agonizing collision when they finally catch you. Heals. In a final, desperate plea, the ringleader turns to Lena, begging her to call off the wolves. But the well of her mercy ran dry years ago. Her gaze is a hollow abyss as she softly whispers that she is not the god he needs to be praying to right now. Heals. Out in the desolate parking lot, the glowing taillights of two black sedans idle, ready to swallow the boys whole. Mateo lowers himself back onto his stool, his scarred hand reaching across the laminate counter. Heals. Lena lets out a trembling breath and weaves her fingers through his. It is a heartbreaking contradiction. She is finding comfort in the very darkness that once haunted her. Heals. He murmurs a heavy apology for letting their bloody history bleed into her quiet present. You can drive 1,000 miles to escape your past, but your oldest, deepest ghosts will always find a way to ride shotgun. Heals. Let us step back together and look at the emotional wreckage left behind in this room. Little Maria, barely out of her teenage years, slowly creeps from the safety of the glowing kitchen. Heals. She is trembling like a fragile autumn leaf as she drapes a knitted sweater over Lena's shoulders, whispering a tearful thank you. Lena held the line when any normal soul would have shattered into pieces. Heals. It is a beautiful tragedy how surviving absolute chaos weaves iron directly into your spine. Over in the corner, Mateo remains seated in the dim shadows, motionless as a stone gargoyle. He is a man built for war, taking slow, Heals, deliberate breaths to force his racing heartbeat back to normal. The old bartender slides a steaming mug of black coffee down the counter. In a life built entirely on violence, a silent nod of respect speaks so much louder than any apology ever could. Heals. You and I have probably seen this exact shift in gravity before. When the dust finally settles, human nature demands that everyone bows to the most dangerous man in the room. The bartender instinctively steps back, heels, quietly submitting to the new apex predator. But Matteo understands the agonizing weight of his own shadow. He swivels a stool, lowering his head, and offers a gentle apology to the room for disrupting their evening. It is a masterful, heels, heartbreaking transformation. The Grim Reaper instantly dissolves into a weary, protective guardian. An elderly woman begins cursing the thugs who fled, and a truck driver steps forward, aligning himself with the victor. It is a strange, heels, unsettling truth about the human heart. We will happily forgive the darkest of monsters, just as long as we know that monster is the one standing guard at our own front door. Heels. Just watch the painful temptation unfolding right in front of us. The heavy-set trucker leans over the counter, desperately trying to pull a retired ghost back into a war zone. He starts romanticizing Matteo's blood-soaked history, Heels, praising how the legendary Black Lion used to keep the real street sharks at bay. He is begging the fallen king to rise from ashes and save their rotting city. Matteo keeps his tired eyes locked on the floorboards, Heels, quietly swearing that those violent days are buried. But the stranger pushes the knife deeper, claiming a true king never abandons his bleeding territory. Matteo goes completely rigid. His scarred knuckles turn white around his mug, Heels, his jaw tightening in the dim neon light. He understands the cruelest rule of survival. Very second a retired soldier picks up his weapon again, his fragile, hard-earned peace is dead forever. Heels. Stick with me here, because we are witnessing the cold mind of a man who understands true suffering. The diner grows so incredibly quiet that the world itself feels paused. Matteo slowly rises to his feet, a towering monument of old sins, Heels, and delivers a chilling promise. He swears to the room that those boys will not suffer a single fractured bone tonight. He is aiming for something far more devastating. From the safety of the kitchen, young Maria nervously whispers, Heels, wondering what could possibly be worse than physical pain. Matteo's eyes go dark as a midnight ocean. He plans to drag those boys into the living rooms of the very families they have destroyed. A shattered jaw can heal over time, Heels, but the heavy weight of human consequence lasts a lifetime. Forcing a cruel man to finally stare directly at his own reflection is the only way to truly break his wicked soul, Heels. The anxiety in the air is unbearable until Lena's trembling voice breaks the silence. She looks at him with genuine fear, terrified that the dormant monster has finally woken up. She asks if he is really throwing their fragile, Heels, peaceful life away just to play king again. The moment those words leave her lips, Matteo's steel armor fractures. Beneath the terrifying reputation, he is just a broken man desperately trying to keep her safe. He gently takes her shaking hands, Heels, swearing that he has no desire to reclaim his bloody crown. He only wants to burn the cycle of violence down to its roots. The room listens in awe as the old ghost explains his final mission, Heels. Throwing damaged boys into concrete cells only creates sharper weapons. To truly reform the dark heart of a criminal, you must force them to swallow the bitter poison of their own sins. Heels. The atmosphere inside the diner shifts in a heartbeat. An older man leans forward, his voice a low gravel, asking what happens after these young thugs face the rot in their own souls. Matteo remains absolutely still. Heels. He offers them one single chance. Use their violent instincts to shield the innocent instead of preying on them. He knows most will fail, but maybe one will turn it around. The trucker slowly nods, realizing this is not blind payback, Heels. It is actual justice. Then, Jimmy steps from the shadows, looking like a man drowning in guilt. He confesses that he froze when the terror started. You and I know that feeling, do we not? True courage is not the absence of fear, Heels. It is feeling your knees shake, tasting the panic, and deciding to stand your ground anyway, Heels. Jimmy stands there, sweat clinging to his forehead, crushed under the heavy weight of his own regret. He stammers, whispering that he should have fought back the second the chaos erupted. Lena gently tries to ease his mind, Heels, reminding him that ordinary people are not built for street violence. But the older woman refuses to sugarcoat it. She calls their silence what it was, cowardice. Now watch what Matteo does next. He sweeps his heavy gaze across the room, Heels, laying down a new law for the broken. He tells them the next time the wolves come to the door, they must make a massive scene, scream until your lungs burn, shatter a glass, tear the silence apart. Predators only win when their prey freezes, Heels. To survive the dark, you have to get loud and refuse to be a victim, Heels. The trucker shakes off the ghost of his helplessness, pulling out a greasy diner napkin. He actually wrote down the license plates of those thugs right before Mateo unleashed hell. Mateo offers a slow, silent nod of respect. Heals. It proves that even a tiny spark of defiance can push back the dark. But then the adrenaline fades and Mateo just crumbles. The weight of his violent past drops on him like an anvil. Lena steps in, pressing her head against his chest. Heals. In a single breath, the ruthless enforcer softens into a man who just needs comfort. Outside the highway is a black void, but inside this fragile group is knitting together. When you are terrified, heals. Finding another hand to hold turns a room of victims into an absolute fortress. Heals. Let us take a breath and watch the room settle. The tension finally evaporates. The trucker slumps into a booth, and the diner almost mimics normal life. Silverware clinks against porcelain, but no one in that room will ever be the same. Heals. Mateo closes his eyes, nursing his black coffee, willing his heart to slow down. Lena stays glued to his side, drawing warmth from his fading rage to stop her hands from shaking. It looks like a quiet midnight stop, but beneath the surface, heals. Everyone is bleeding invisible wounds. Jimmy offers coffee, but Mateo waves him away. 20 minutes pass without a single word spoken. Real healing is not a fiery victory lap. It is the silent, heals, exhausting act of just trying to breathe again after the nightmare ends. Heals. Mateo finally fractures the quiet, reaching for Lena's arm to pull her up. He whispers that the time has come to finish his dark vendetta, but Lena refuses to move. She digs her nails into his sleeve, commanding him to stop. Heals. The rest of the world fades as they lock eyes in a quiet, desperate standoff. She demands he abandon the bloodlust, reminding him of their promise to build a normal life. Mateo argues that the street trash must pay for putting fear in her eyes. Heals. But Lena holds her ground, resolute and fierce. She tells him they bruised her pride, but they failed to break her spirit. This is a lesson we all need to learn. Taking a massive blow does not mean your story is over. Heals. It simply proves that your mind is built like an absolute tank. Heals. Lena presses her palm against his chest, feeling the violent rhythm of his heart. Mateo clenches his jaw, fighting a brutal war against his own dark instincts. He asks if she genuinely wants him to let those monsters walk away. Lena does not flinch. Heals. She tells him to proceed with his twisted plan, but adds a condition that changes everything. She is going with him. Mateo stares at her, completely stunned. Let us unpack why this matters. Lena spent years working with shattered kids, heals, believing anyone can bounce back. She understands the harsh truth of surviving trauma. You cannot sit in the shadows and wait for a mafia boss to save the day. To truly take your life back, heals, you have to walk right back into the flames and pull yourself out of the ashes. Heals. You and I are watching a masterpiece of survival unfold. Lena's buried instincts as a social worker ignite, ready to confront the men who broke her peace. Mateo, wired to be a ruthless protector, instantly tries to shut her down. Heals. But Lena grips his arm tighter, fighting for her own soul. If she lets him play the shield, she remains a victim forever. Pointing a shaking finger at the faces around them, she calls out everyone, even her husband, for treating her like fragile glass. Heals. She refuses to live in a cage. This is the tragic trap of deep love. We throw ourselves in front of bullets for the people we care about, completely blind to the reality that playing the hero steals the exact strength they need to save themselves. Heals. Picture the heavy shadows of this scene. The dim yellow light falls across Lena as she shatters the invisible walls around her. The moment Mateo walked through those doors, he claimed all the power with his pure, violent gravity. Heals. She loves him for being her shield, but she sees the tragic flaw. If he simply slaughters these men while she watches from the sidelines, the trauma will haunt her forever. The diner falls deathly quiet. Then Jimmy, heals. A cook who has witnessed far too many broken lives, speaks up. His voice rough like gravel, he explains that rushing in to rescue someone only strips them of their power. Real, lasting healing does not come from a savior. Heals. It only happens when you step back and let the victim get their own payback. Heals. Look at the undeniable power shifting in this room. The older woman stands up, her cane striking the floor like a gunshot. Staring right through Mateo, she validates Lena's raw courage. For 2 hard years, heals, she watched Lena face down the worst thugs without an ounce of fear. Tapping her cane again, she orders the Mafia Don to drop his Toxic Savior Act and let his wife fight her own war. You can practically see Mateo struggling. Heals. His ingrained mob instinct to destroy his enemies is crashing hard into his respect for her boundaries. It drops a massive truth bomb. Sometimes the most profound act of love is not fighting the war for them, heals. It is standing totally still and betting everything on the crazy strength of the person you care about, heals. Matteo releases a heavy, ragged breath, finally surrendering his desperate need to control the chaos. He asks her what the plan is. Lena answers with raw honesty. There is no grand strategy, heals. She simply needs to stand in front of these monsters and prove she is not their prey. Matteo watches her, deeply humbled by her terrifying bravery. He makes the call to Marco, delivering a command that changes the night, heals. He calls off the execution and tells him to drag the men inside. He hands the crown directly to his wife. A 5-minute warning hangs in the air. Lena is terrified, her pulse hammering in her ears, but she gives a firm nod. It is a terrifying gamble, heals, but the only way to truly kill a nightmare is to stare right into its empty, dead eyes and absolutely refuse to blink, heals. The mood in the room shifts the moment Matteo touches her face. He offers one final, chilling warning. If those punks make a single threatening move, the merciless boss comes back out to play. But Lena grabs his wrists with an ironclad grip, heals, demanding his absolute trust. Matteo closes his eyes, bearing the agonizing stress of letting the woman he loves walk into the dark alone. When his eyes open again, the ruthless Don is gone. He is just a man in total awe of his wife. Outside the glass, heals. Harsh headlights slice through the night. The targets have arrived. Lena stands tall, swallowing her bitter panic. Here is the crazy reality. Reclaiming your peace usually means walking straight back into the exact fire that burned you, heals. The heavy diner doors kick open. The 3 abusers are shoved into the harsh fluorescent light, forced to lock eyes with the woman they thought was an easy mark. They look completely wrecked. The arrogant leader has lost all his swagger, heals, looking dead inside. His buddy is shaking so hard his knees are buckling, and the youngest kid just stares at the scuffed tiles, drowning in deep regret. Marco, the deadliest guy in the syndicate, heals, gives Matteo a brief nod before looking at Lena with profound, silent respect. This entire terrifying setup proves one simple, absolute fact. There is nothing in this world more dangerous or more beautifully terrifying, heals, than a broken person carefully putting their own pieces back together, heals. You and I need to pause and take in this massive vibe shift. When the cops asked if she wanted to drop the charges, she gave them a death glare. Now this tired diner is a psychological arena. Lena steps right to the center, heals, clutching a soft sweater over her torn shirt, radiating pure survival. The bullies are now the absolute prey, backed against the cold glass. The late-night crowd turns into a silent jury watching a legendary mental beatdown, heals. The supposed alpha of the group, his ego completely shattered, tries to stutter out a fake apology. Lena shuts him up with one single syllable. Her voice is dead quiet, but it packs enough authority to vaporize his excuse, heals. It proves that standing fiercely in your own truth is the ultimate weapon against anyone who tries to break you, heals. The silence is so heavy you could hear a heartbeat when Lena orders the leader to keep his mouth shut. The tension is thick enough to choke on. The large thug squirms in his own skin, while the younger boy practically folds inward, heals, begging the floor to swallow him. Lena takes a slow, deliberate step closer. In the shadows, Matteo stands like a stone statue, agonizingly fighting his own brutal nature just to let her finish this. She stares the leader down, heals, asking if he comprehends the permanent scars of public humiliation. He freezes. She methodically strips away their violent masquerade, revealing them as terrified children desperate for power. She leans in, heals, whispering that their cruelty completely failed to break her. A scratched surface does not mean the foundation is ruined, heals. And the most striking part? She never even raises her voice. Her words act like a scalpel, slicing cleanly through to the roots of her pain. They did not just ruin her clothes. They violated a sanctuary she spent 3 exhausting years building, heals. You can feel the shared grief radiating through the room. An old man quietly wipes a tear. The cook grips the counter, knuckles white. Gesturing to the booths, Lena forces them to realize they poisoned a safe haven for wounded souls, heals. The cook nods in solemn agreement. Then comes the ultimate twist. Instead of letting her husband execute them in the dark, she offers a choice. They stole her control, so now she turns their free will into a weapon, heals. True justice is not about destroying your enemies. It is about forcing them to live with the weight of their own actions, heals. You and I have to respect the cold, quiet genius of this trap. The gang leader's face brightens up in the dim light. He puffs his chest, convinced he just scored a free pass. But then Lena drops the hammer, her voice barely a whisper, heals. She gestures to the shadows where Mateo is lurking, letting the heavy threat of the syndicate hang in the air. If they walk away tonight, his cartel will systematically dismantle their lives, guaranteeing a lifetime of looking over their shoulders. Feels. Freezing panic instantly washes over these boys. She shatters their arrogance before offering one tiny agonizing escape hatch. It is no free pass, but a relentless grind toward real, painful redemption. Sometimes, feels. True freedom only comes after we are forced to face the monsters we have become. Feels. Her words hit the room like a heavy gavel. She sentences them to the ultimate psychological trial. No metal cages. Instead, they must work for the families who lost loved ones to violent men exactly like them. Feels. They have to serve these broken homes and absorb the quiet misery they caused. The youngest boy speaks up, his voice cracking, asking how long this lasts. Lena does not blink. She tells him it goes on until their twisted minds are entirely rewired. Feels. She fixes her glare on the leader until he looks away. This punishment will not stop until their violent egos are burned to ash. Stripped of his swagger, the leader stammers out one final question about what happens if they refuse. Feels. It reminds us that the heaviest debt in life is always the one we owe to the innocent people we have broken. Feels. Mateo steps from the shadows, dropping a threat so heavy it lands like a tombstone. He promises his syndicate will erase them. That cold reality shatters the tough kid. He hits the floor, begging for his life. Lena just stands there, feels, totally unimpressed, telling him to swallow those empty tears and grow a real conscience. Then the tension shifts entirely. An 80-year-old grandmother slowly shuffles forward, the scrape of her cane cutting through the boy's pathetic sobbing. Feels. She walks right up to the gang leader, staring directly into his soul. One sharp glare from her tired eyes vaporizes his fragile ego on the spot. We quickly learn that true power never comes from intimidation, but from the quiet, feels, unshakable strength of those who have survived the absolute worst. Feels. The grandmother's voice is pure heartbreak. She explains how her grandson was destroyed by thugs exactly like his crew. She uses that heavy grief to gut the leader, making it clear the universe never gives free second chances. Feels. Real redemption is earned by carrying the suffocating misery you caused. She turns her back, her cane tapping the floor, and the boss completely loses it. He breaks down bawling, his tough guy facade shattered to pieces. Feels. He begs to know why they are letting him live. Lena points at Mateo and reveals a crushing truth. The terrifying man protecting her today once went through this exact same brutal trial to win his soul back. Right on cue, feels. Marco kicks the diner doors open. It is a harsh reminder that our deepest regrets can sometimes become the exact things that save us. Feels. The hitman's dark presence forces them into a trembling corner. You and I are watching these arrogant predators get completely defanged. The gang gives up, their violent energy melting into pure submission. The leader slumps forward, a broken man, feels. Marco steps into the light, looking like a force of nature, ready to bag them up. It is tragic when the weeping boss whispers a shaky thank you to the man who dismantled his life. Lena stays entirely cold, offering zero comfort, feels. The heavy steel doors slam shut with the finality of a vault. She lets out a ragged breath only after their taillights vanish into the dark. 21 agonizing days later, a sudden text alert shatters the midnight quiet. It proves that sometimes, feels, a long silence is simply the storm gathering its terrible strength. Feels. Lena stares at the glowing screen, confirming the boys are actually playing along. She glances at Mateo, who shoots her a silent question with his tired eyes. She quietly whispers that they are following the brutal rules. Feels. You can watch the heavy stress melt right off the old mobster's face in the dim light. But here is the massive question hanging in the room. Are these guys actually changing their dark ways, or just faking it to dodge a fatal bullet? Feels. Marco's program is a psychological meat grinder. To shatter their toxic brotherhood, these men are isolated, stripped of their arrogant armor, and dropped straight into the shattered lives of the families they ruined. Feels. True transformation always requires us to walk barefoot through the very fire we started ourselves. Feels. Picture Derek, shifting awkwardly on the Castellano family's front step. Inside is a mother completely hollowed out by trauma. A mob crew murdered her husband 3 years ago, leaving 2 teenage boys who desperately need their father. Feels. Derek is supposed to be doing yard work, but the air around that house is suffocating. On his first day, he shows up at 6 in the morning sharp, playing the good soldier. The door swings open, but the widow offers zero greeting. Feels. She hits him with a soul-crushing stare that strips away his street pride. With a voice like pure ice, she tells him he is late. She is weaponizing her unimaginable grief to make him feel utterly worthless. Heals. It shows that hurt people will always use their profound pain as a shield to keep the world from causing more damage. Heals. Without blinking, the widow hands him a punishing schedule. When Derek tries to argue he was on time, she shuts him down instantly, making it clear this is a battle he cannot win. She tosses him the keys, daring him to prove he is not just a monster. Heals. Inside the suffocating car, the two boys in the backseat radiate pure hatred. The silence is agonizingly heavy, broken only by the engine's low hum. Finally, at a red light, the tension boils over. Heals. The older boy leans forward and verbally tears Derek apart through the rearview mirror. He rips apart the twisted mob logic that got his father killed, exposing the lie that hurting people makes a man powerful. It is a harsh truth. Sometimes, Heals, blinding anger is simply a broken heart screaming out for a little bit of justice. Heals. The grieving kid builds a massive emotional wall, telling Derek to shut his mouth, drive, and basically cease to exist. Derek swallows his pride, takes the hit, and slowly nods. Now, watch how the lighting shifts here. Fast forward 21 days. Heals. Derek is sweating under the sun, his hands blistered from fixing a broken porch the dead father never finished. He bought the wood himself and expects no praise. From the dark kitchen, the widow is quietly watching him. She maintains her icy silence. Heals, but finally nudges the screen door open to leave him a plate of food and cold water. It is not total forgiveness, but it is a monumental crack in her armor. Real redemption is never glamorous. It is always built day by day through quiet, painful, Heals, and entirely thankless work. Heals. Stick with me here. Watch Derek get pushed to his absolute limit. He waits 40 brutal minutes in the blazing heat for a forgotten item, never complaining once. When he returns, the younger brother actually offers him a fragile smile. Heals. But the older kid is still acting like an emotional bouncer, waiting for Derek's violent nature to resurface. When someone is deeply traumatized, they naturally assume every kind gesture is a cruel trap. Later that night, Heals. Derek stands in the dark yard, secretly listening to the family fighting inside. The younger boy is bravely defending Derek's hard work. Hearing this, the older brother loses his mind, screaming that cutting grass does not erase a murder. Heals. Earning trust is a mountain that feels impossible to climb once you have caused true devastation. Heals. The older boy screams a heartbreaking question. Why should they give this monster the precious time violently robbed from their father? The following silence is deafening. Then the mother speaks. Her voice trembles. Heals. But she softly shares her dead husband's belief. He always trusted that broken people could actually change. It is a heavy realization. Forgiving the unforgivable is often the only way to stop torturing your own soul. In the shadows outside, Heals, Derek is wrecked by her grace. The last pieces of his mafia armor shatter completely. He collapses against the brick wall, weeping as the crushing weight of guilt finally breaks him. Now let's open the next file together. We find Ryan, Heals, a former hitman, now forced to protect a young woman paralyzed by the trauma of a past assault. Heals, frame the shot on Ryan. A man whose entire life was breaking skulls is now forced to protect a broken victim. That first week inside the car is a suffocating nightmare. She sits trembling in the back seat, terrified of him. Heals. Ryan stares into the rearview mirror, his eyes haunted, whispering apologies to nobody. By the second week, she finds the courage to ask why he beat up that random waitress. His response is an emotional gut punch. He mumbles he thought she was a nobody. Heals. He had to treat people like garbage to justify his violent life. Now the guilt is eating his soul alive. He grips the wheel, tears blurring his vision, begging her to tell him how to fix the damage. She stares out the window and simply whispers, "Heals, you cannot." It is a devastating lesson. Some things once deeply shattered can never be made whole again. Heals. She quietly tells Ryan his only move now is to stop being a monster. Boom, a hard cut to Kurt. He is sweating profusely in a grimy Bronx community center. This building is exactly where his old victims grew up. Heals. He is scrubbing graffiti while a hardened social worker named Diana watches his every move. When she grills him about his past, Kurt completely cracks. He spills all the bloody details of his mafia days. Diana does not even blink. Heals. She lets that awful truth hang in the air before hitting him with a massive reality check. She points at the kids across the room, stating half of them are hiding from street goons exactly like him. The rest are desperate for a father they never had. Heals. It proves that the only way to heal our own wounds is to step up and become the shield for someone else. Heals. Look at this, my friends. Diana points at the gym, handing Kurt a terrifying ultimatum. To wipe his bloody slate clean, he must become the shield these kids never had. We watch the days blur, and Kurt's mind literally rewires itself. Feels. We see him grinding under late-night lamps, tutoring traumatized teens. His frame physically buckles under the heavy weight of their pain. This forced empathy is violently ripping his mob ego to shreds. We cut back to the quiet diner. Feels. Lena asks Mateo if this wild experiment is actually working. Mateo stares out at the dark street. He knows how deeply flawed human nature can be. He admits that even if these boys relapse, Feels, this desperate attempt to fix their souls is absolutely necessary. It proves a brutally sad point. Most people walk through their entire lives without ever making the painful choice to change. Feels. 6 weeks bleed away into the night until the diner chime slices the air like a blade. Lena looks up and her blood turns to frost. It is Derek. But the man standing there is a walking ghost, his face hollowed out by a brutal eating guilt. Feels. Those heavy hands that used to shatter men for a living are now trembling like dry leaves. Panic instantly chokes the room. Jimmy fumbles blindly for the phone. Mateo is out of his chair, muscles coiled for a bloodbath. But watch Lena in this moment. Feels. She forces her racing pulse into a dead calm, gently sets down her rag, and uses a voice smooth as midnight to order the room to stand down. The lesson here is simple. Feels. The only way to tame your worst nightmare is to look it directly in the eyes and absolutely refuse to blink. Feels. Her steady voice breathes oxygen back into the suffocating room. Mateo stays planted, eyes locked onto the door. As Derek drags his feet into the harsh light, the monster is gone. He moves like a wounded stray. He stammers out that boss Marco, Feels, strictly forbade this visit, his heavy baritone shattering under the weight of his sins. You and I both know how that undeniable urge to face the people we have hurt can drag us through the dark. Lena points a cold, steady finger toward a back booth, Feels, and Derek practically collapses into the vinyl seat. Across from this ruined man, Lena sits perfectly still, a statue of quiet power. His violent swagger has evaporated. The truth is unavoidable. When you set out to destroy another person, Feels, you will always end up burning your own soul to ash. Feels. He speaks with an unnatural rhythm, stripped of the mafia pride he once wore like armor. His voice breaks as he quietly begs to use her first name. Lena gives a single nod, setting a mood of frozen dread. Across the table, Feels. Derek rubs his hands over the cheap formica, sweating out pure terror. Coming here violates every rule Marco ever wrote, a gamble that could end his life tonight. Lena hits him with the most agonizing weapon. Total, crushing silence. Feels. When you give a guilty man quiet air, Hal's mind spills every toxic secret. Tears well up as he chokes out his daily torment. He spends mornings scrubbing the floors of a man he helped murder, and afternoons driving that dead man's children to school. Feels. The truth is, a guilty conscience is a prison you build for yourself. Feels. He weeps openly, his frame shaking as he describes the widow's devastating brand of revenge. The deepest wounds never require a single drop of blood. She simply started sliding photographs of her dead husband next to Derek's morning coffee. Feels. No screaming, no threats, just silent, smiling pictures of wedding days and newborn babies. In an instant, his thick mafia armor shattered into dust. Every photograph was a precision strike to his soul, Feels, forcing him to look at the human cost of his brutal career. Tears stream down his hollow cheeks as he describes the final blow. The murdered man's teenage son walked in crying, Feels, beaten bloody by local kids because his father was no longer there to protect him. The fallout from your darkest choices will always outlive the fleeting thrill of the crime. Feels. Derek hyperventilates as he recalls the untamed rage burning in that older boy's eyes. In that dim booth, a terrifying realization washes over him. He is not some untouchable mafia kingpin. He is a sickness rotting the city from the inside out. Feels. He chokes on his own twisted logic, confessing that his belief in violence as ultimate power is the exact poison that ruined an innocent family. Watching this broken giant unravel, Lena feels a brief flicker of pity, Feels, but keeps her expression carved from stone. Derek admits his deepest fear. He is terrified that playing the good man will never wash the blood from his ledger. Lena leans in closer, reading the desperate undercurrent in his heavy voice. Feels. He wants his past violence to be excused as childhood trauma. But true healing only begins the moment your excuses finally die. Feels. He draws a heavy line between her pure nature and the toxic rot eating his mind. Her quiet kindness acted as a brutal mirror, reflecting the empty black hole sitting in his chest. Digging his scarred hands into his eyes, Feels. He spills the ugliest truth about his bruised ego. Her simple decency made this feared enforcer feel incredibly weak. To protect his fragile mobster persona, he tried to mentally destroy her. Heals. He admits the widow's daily politeness makes him feel that exact same crushing weakness today. But his perspective has shifted. He sees it as an unearned grace exposing his moral decay. He breaks down, confessing he has no right to ask for forgiveness. Heals. The hardest lesson we ever learn is how to accept grace we do not deserve. Heals. He knows a clean slate is out of reach. But to preserve his fragile sanity, he must bare his soul to the woman he nearly destroyed. He makes one thing crystal clear. No one forced him into this dark booth. Lena absorbs every heavy word. Heals. Let us look at this closely, shall we? Human nature pushes us to forgive someone simply to stop their weeping. But Lena is operating on a totally different level. She knows handing out a free pass only cheapens the agonizing grind of true redemption. Heals. Instead of offering sweet comforts, she goes straight for the throat. She demands he name the exact core of the trauma inflicted. When he stares back, lost in the dark, she drops the heavy truth. It was never about the public humiliation. Sometimes, Heals, refusing to be someone's savior is the most powerful choice you can possibly make. Heals. She bypasses the shallow surface of physical fear. Staring through his hollow shell, she describes the true psychological poison. It was the creeping paranoia he planted, the terror that her basic right to feel safe was gone forever. Heals. Derek physically caves inward under that reality. But right here, Lena flips the narrative. She tells him her mental armor does not depend on the mercy of thugs. It is a fortress she built from the ground up, inside her own mind. Heals. She actively chose to erase his shadow. When he whispers that her grace is more than he deserves, she freezes him out. Her survival has absolutely nothing to do with his fragile redemption arc. Heals. She is simply handing him a final eviction notice from her thoughts. Always remember, your peace of mind never belongs to the villains who try to break you. Heals. She surgically separates her healing from his desperate need to feel like a decent man. Those quiet acts of service? She strips them down. They are frantic tools used to build a personality not rooted in violence. He absorbs the heavy reality check. Heals, quietly wiping his face. Lena then draws an unbreakable line. She validates his apology, seeing the total ruin inside his chest. But she coldly locks away the prize he walked in to claim. The words, "I forgive you." Heals. True redemption is a lonely road you must walk completely by yourself. Derek takes the blow, slowly pushing himself up from the booth. As he turns to leave, she offers one final thought. The ultimate lesson here? Heals. Never waste the profound agony of finally confronting the monster in your own mirror. Heals. The second that heavy door swings shut, the suffocating tension shatters. Mateo slides into the seat the hitman just abandoned, pulling Lena back into the present. The adrenaline crash hits and the tears finally fall. Heals. But underneath the trembling of her hands, a profound realization settles in. She is bulletproof. Mateo holds her hand, delivering a simple truth. By refusing to offer cheap forgiveness, Heals. Lena forced Derek to swallow the only medicine that cures a rotten soul, absolute accountability. Outside in the freezing air, Derek stands under the pale glow of a street lamp. He pulls out his phone and texts Marco, Heals, fully confessing to the forbidden visit. With one quiet message, he torches his entire life of lies to the ground. Real growth only ever begins the very second you finally decide to step out of the shadows. Heals. Stick with me because you and I need to watch how this midnight timeline wraps up. Derek has surrendered, bracing for whatever bloody payback Marco will unleash. But then his phone lights up the shadows. Heals. The widow just hijacked the entire chain of command. She orders Derek to stay exactly where he is. Why? Because the hollow shell of his ego is finally crushed, and he is choking on the ashes of his ruined life. Standing alone in the freezing night, Heals. This shattered man feels a strange, unfamiliar warmth, a tiny spark of genuine a few hours. The diner is locked tight, the air heavy with the sharp smell of bleach. Mateo and Lena sit quietly at the counter, Heals, breathing easy in the sanctuary they reclaimed. Finding true peace in a violent world usually happens in the quiet moments when no one else is watching. Heals. Let us look closely at our survivors, hidden in their neon-lit sanctuary. The rhythmic motion of pouring black coffee is the anchor keeping them from crashing. Mateo watches Lena's heavy silence, Heals, his eyes carrying the cold wisdom of a man who knows the hitman life far too intimately. Across the rim of her mug, her mind is spinning out of control over the choice she just made. She handed a known monster a rare opportunity, Heals. What if he was just lying to save his own skin? She whispers into the rising steam. Mateo cuts through her spiraling panic with the precision of a scalpel. He tells her in a steady voice that fake apologies mean nothing now, feels, because Derek has already set his own brutal karma into motion. In a world this cold, empty words dissolve into the night. The lesson to remember is that only concrete, painful actions will keep you breathing, feels. Her voice cracks. What if some innocent person gets destroyed while we wait for his karma to land? You and I have to pause here because Lena is drowning under the heavy weight of survivor's guilt. She fears that choosing mercy makes her a coward, feels. Mateo refuses to let her drown. He steps closer, locking eyes with her before the panic pulls her under. You are not soft, he tells her, the heavy certainty in his voice shattering her insecurity, feels. He reminds her that handing a violent man a mirror to his soul is the ultimate display of dominance. Mateo quietly confesses that his own dark instincts would have simply left those men bleeding on the concrete, feels, and that is the beautiful truth of the night. True power is never found in crushing your enemies. It is found in having the profound strength to let them walk away, feels. The flickering neon of the diner casts bruising shadows across Mateo's face, a man wrestling with a terrifying confession. His first instinct was pure destruction, to unleash a nightmare upon those thugs, feels. It is incredibly easy to slip into the skin of a monster when you believe you are playing the protector. But Lena, her voice trembling, anchors him. She knows that surrendering to the dark would shatter his redemption, feels. Seeing Mateo shatter the door offered a brief, desperate safety, but it forced her back into a role she absolutely despises, the helpless victim. The deepest wound of trauma is never just the violence itself, feels. It is the agonizing theft of your independence, a fragile piece of your soul that takes immense, quiet courage to rebuild piece by piece, feels. Look closely at Mateo in this heavy silence. His jaw is locked tight, an iron vault refusing to let her spiral into this agonizing guilt. You never needed a hero, he tells her, his deep voice carrying through the empty diner like a solemn vow, feels. You and I must understand his point here. There is a profound difference between being powerless and simply allowing the one you love to carry the weight. But Lena is crumbling. For 3 grueling years, she built a delicate peace, feels, only to have it violently torn apart in seconds. She confesses her darkest fear, the thought that her kindness is just a mask for weakness. Mateo refuses to let that lie breathe. He holds her gaze and delivers a vital truth, feels. The cruelty of broken men does not define her gentle heart. It only exposes the hollow, bitter wasteland festering inside of them, feels. He holds her gaze, tearing down the illusion of those street thugs with the cold, calculated logic of his past life. They did not attack because they were powerful, but because they are entirely empty inside. When Lena tries to argue, feels, he gently stops her, painting the picture of what he actually saw when he broke through that door. He did not find a shattered victim, feels. He saw a brilliant survivor fighting off blinding panic by clinging to a single truth, that the man she loves always arrives on time. She had turned his daily routine into a shield. Relying on someone is never a defeat. It is the highest, feels, most beautiful form of trust a human heart can offer. Staring pure malice in the face and holding your ground until the light returns is a quiet, monumental strength that mindless violence will simply never comprehend, feels. Lena collapses against his chest, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat chase away the lingering shadows. Yet her mind remains trapped in the dark. She whispers about a local widow whose life was dismantled by these very same men, feels, and a heavy survivor's guilt begins to suffocate her. How can she embrace grace when so many others were destroyed? But listen to how Mateo completely reframes her pain, feels. He tells her that this agonizing guilt is the exact reason she alone is capable of granting mercy. She understands the weight of trauma, which means she grasps the miracle of a second chance. Lifting his heavily scarred hands, feels. He reminds her of the ruthless enforcer he once was. Choosing kindness in a deeply broken world is not a sign of naivety. It is the bravest, most defiant choice you can make when everything around you threatens to burn, feels. The late-night focus shifts to her trembling hands. Years ago, she drew a line in the sand, refusing to let the suffocating grip of the underworld pull him under, betting her entire spirit on his redemption, feels. Mateo knows she did not just save him from a dark alley. She patiently dismantled his cold, calculating persona and helped him discover his humanity. The memory of that struggle breaks her composure, feels. Tears finally fall as she admits the profound despair that consumed her when he vanished for months. She had only wanted the endless fear to stop. But when he crawled back to her, bleeding and drowning in the sins of his past, feels a devastating truth set in. Watching someone you love slowly morph into an unrecognizable monster entirely hollowed out by revenge is a tragedy far worse than mourning them at a gravesite. Feels. Just peace, he confesses in a beautifully gritty whisper. This man perfectly captures the agonizing reality of walking away from a life of violence. Surrendering to the savage instincts of the street is tragically simple. Feels. The rules of war are clear. You either hunt or you become the prey. But building peace? That is a relentless, exhausting climb. It forces you to drop your shields and sit quietly with the ghosts of your own trauma. Matteo strips away his pride. Feels. Admitting how his mind still instinctively reaches for violence when panic sets in. When he saw those men cornering her, the ghost of the ruthless enforcer screamed for blood. The only thing that kept his hands clean was Lena. Feels. True love acts as the heaviest anchor in the storm. It holds you back from the abyss, demanding that you choose the light over the easy comfort of revenge. Feels. They sit together in the dim light of the diner, two weary survivors catching their breath after the darkest night of their lives. Lena asks a question that hangs heavy in the air. Does he ever crave the intoxicating rush of being a feared kingpin? Feels. Matteo does not lie to her. He confesses that a small part of him misses the untouchable power, but he fiercely condemns the devastating price of that life. The slow death of your soul while constantly looking over your shoulder. Feels. He looks around at the worn leather booths and the humming coffee machines. This humble diner is not a cage. It is his ultimate sanctuary. True growth works exactly like this. The most profound, unshakable peace is almost always found in the quietest, feels, most ordinary routines, because that is where the weary heart is finally given permission to rest. Feels. Real power, he tells her with quiet conviction, is never about tearing another person down to inflate your own ego. It is about holding your ground and keeping your spirit soft when the world tries to rip your heart to shreds. Feels. This is a breathtaking evolution for a man whose previous language was written entirely in blood. Hearing his confession, the last of Lena's tension finally melts away into his embrace. I love you, she whispers. Feels. The words landing like fragile blossoms in the aftermath of a bitter war. He holds her tight, still carrying the guilt of being seconds too late. But you and I need to look closely at her eyes in this moment. The terrified victim is entirely gone. Feels. She silences his apologies, realizing a profound truth. That terrifying chaos was not a punishment. It was the blazing furnace required to forge her gentle spirit into unbreakable steel. Feels. She finally understands it completely. Her gentle nature was never a flaw. It has always been her ultimate shield. Matteo looks at her like she hung the moon, calling her the most resilient soul he has ever known. Outside, feels. The city traffic rushes by in the dark, entirely blind to the profound emotional victory unfolding in this small booth. We are witnessing two scarred survivors who chose to bury their darkest demons and fight for a quiet life. Feels. Lena takes a deep breath, and the lingering dread finally shatters. 3 months drift by in a blink. The suffocating summer heat softens into a crisp autumn breeze. Feels. The diner effortlessly returns to its humble rhythm of pouring coffee and wiping tables. It reveals a beautiful secret about healing. Once you finally feel safe, the most brilliantly boring routines become the absolute best medicine for a weary heart. Feels. Just look at Lena as she moves through the morning rush. You and I are watching a transformed woman glide across the floor. She still carries the trays, but her presence holds an undeniable grace. Her smile remains warm, but the fragile, fearful girl of the past has been laid to rest. She commands this space now. Her steady posture speaks a vital truth. Kindness is a deliberate choice, not an invitation for cruelty. No one will ever cross her boundaries again. Suddenly, the chime of the front door echoes sharply. Every head in the room snaps toward the glass. Shoulders lock and breaths catch as the ghost of that terrifying night sweeps back into the diner. But the heavy tension shatters into immediate relief. It is only sweet old Mr. Patterson, slowly shaking the autumn chill from his heavy wool coat. Mr. Patterson settles into his seat, and the anxious diner slowly exhales. But turn your attention to Matteo, brooding in the corner booth. He sits perfectly still, carrying the heavy tension of a loaded weapon. He claims that spot daily, his dark eyes scanning the entrance and tracking Lena's movements. You cannot dress a former hitman in civilian clothes and expect him to unlearn the brutal laws of the street. His mind remains locked in a quiet war, endlessly hunting for threats, feels. But when Lena catches his intense stare across the room, she feels no fear. She offers him a warm smile, feeling entirely secure under the watch of her protector. It is a beautiful reminder that real love means embracing the absolute, feels, chaotic mess of the person you cherish. The heavy quiet finally breaks when Maria yells out an order from the kitchen, feels. Behind the serving counter, Maria is waging her own invisible war. She has morphed into a fiercely protective guardian, her eyes narrowing at every unfamiliar man who steps through the doorway, anticipating the next strike, feels. Lena gently reminds her that the street vendettas are finished, but Maria refuses to lower her guard. There is a quiet wisdom hiding in her stubbornness, feels. Building towering emotional walls to shield your fragile heart does not mean you must stand on the battlements entirely alone. The morning routine hums along until that dreadful brass bell chimes one more time. In a single heartbeat, feels, the air in the room turns to jagged ice. Coffee cups freeze midway to lips. Conversations die in the backs of throats. Derek, Ryan, and Kurt have just stepped out of the cold and right back into the very sanctuary they nearly destroyed months ago, feels. The suffocating weight in the room is nearly impossible to breathe. The subtle shifts in posture tell you exactly who holds the power now. Jimmy goes completely rigid at the grill. Mateo's newspaper hits the table as he shifts his weight, feels, eyes locking onto his targets with lethal intent. But look at Lena, she does not take a single step backward. She walks directly toward the men who haunted her dreams, standing tall and entirely unafraid. The silence is terrifying, feels. Then comes the staggering twist. Derek finally breaks the quiet, but the vicious snarl of a crime boss is completely absent. His voice is hollow as he politely asks for a table. The ruthless predator is gone, replaced by a broken man begging for grace, feels. The truest form of power is not found in a raised fist. It is found in the quiet, unshakable courage of simply standing your ground when the shadows return, feels. The camera of our minds drifts over to Kurt. This massive, brutal enforcer is shrinking under the lights, looking more like a frightened child than a street soldier. Beside him, Ryan is silently weeping, feels, his tough exterior crumbling in a painful confession. Through a cracked voice, he reveals that the widow he once terrorized did not lock her doors against him. In a miraculous act of defiance, she invited him to sit at her family dinner table, feels. Kurt slowly nods, his eyes heavy with shame, whispering about a quiet child at the local rec center who simply asked him to sit and watch a basketball game. For men raised strictly on violence, this unearned grace is a heartbreaking shock to the system, feels. You and I can take this final lesson to heart tonight. Beneath the deepest layers of anger and malice, even the darkest souls are simply searching for a safe place to belong, feels. Look at Derek, a man who used to run these streets, now shaking like a leaf, completely crushed by the weight of his own sins. He chokes up just mentioning little Marco. That poor kid poured out his broken heart to Derek, feels, believing his dead father would be proud of the men fixing their front porch. Across the chipped counter, Lena holds a perfect poker face, though a faint shadow of pity softens her eyes. Suddenly, feels. Mateo scrapes his chair hard against the floor, a violent sound that echoes like a warning shot. Lena just leans forward, lowering her voice. The truth she shares is something we all need to hear. Real redemption is not a performance, feels. It's about those brutal, quiet choices you make when you are completely alone in the dark, feels. Derek throws a desperate look at his crew, then turns his defeated eyes back to Lena. His voice is barely a whisper as he admits that her reckless mercy kept them from plunging over the edge. The entire diner falls dead silent, feels. You can hear the hum of the neon sign outside as everyone watches these hardened killers lay down their invisible weapons. Lena does not flinch. She lays down the absolute law of her sanctuary. Let us look at this moment together, feels. If they ever step inside again, they pay full price. They show complete respect, and they bury their violence at the door. One slip, and they are out forever. It leaves us with a heavy realization tonight, feels. Setting unbreakable boundaries is often the only real way to teach broken people how to truly love, feels. Lena does not stumble over a single word. She holds that room like a judge handing down a sentence, and these dangerous citizens can only nod in submission. She understands how a bruised ego tries to mask itself as a hero, feels. Her cold gaze cuts through their defenses, stripping away any delusions of grandeur they carried in from the rain. There are no medals here, and her forgiveness cannot be bought. They are only allowed a seat because she takes in wounded strays. Heals. Derek fights back tears, his gratitude spilling out like a man begging for air. She gestures toward an isolated booth in the back. It reminds us of a simple truth about grace. Heals. Sometimes the most profound mercy you can offer a shattered soul is just a quiet place to sit and finally breathe. Heals. Just before the men sit, the room shifts. A frail woman from the third booth, who barely survived the crossfire of their last street war, approaches them. She stares into the eyes of these monsters without a single ounce of fear. In a steady voice, Heals, she tells them her grandson studies psychology to help men trapped by violent rage. She begs them to keep trying, reminding them that the world needs proof that demons can become human again. She walks away, Heals, leaving those thugs completely paralyzed by a sudden aching hope. By the register, Mateo asks Lena if she has lost her mind. She probably has, but she refuses to fold. There is a deep lesson in her gamble tonight, Heals. Choosing to believe that a broken man can change is a terrifying risk, but it is a risk that might just save a soul. Heals. The diner slowly breathes again as the clink of coffee cups returns. Deep in the shadows, the three men sit in silence. When they finally walk out into the night, they leave a thick stack of bills on the worn table. Heals. It is a desperate apology wrapped in blood money. Behind the counter, Jimmy wipes his brow, terrified that this piece will shatter by morning. Lena just stares at the empty booth, her expression unreadable. She handed them the map, Heals, but they must walk that road alone. An old regular calls her a saint, but she instantly shoots down the title. She is no savior, and that leaves us with a quiet truth tonight. No matter how much damage you have caused or how dark your histories might be, Heals, you always retain the profound power to put down your weapons and choose peace. Heals. Back in his booth, Mateo sits as a stone. His newspaper is just a prop. His dark eyes never leave Lena. He is watching a brilliant tactician hold her ground, fighting off the syndicate not with bullets, but with unbending rules and quiet dignity. Heals. Beyond the glass, sirens wail, and the city continues to bleed in the rain. But inside these four walls, we are witnessing a miracle. These men are not cowards. Heals. You are looking at the exhausting mental struggle of apex predators actively deciding not to tear their prey apart. Slowly, Mateo and Lena lock eyes across the hazy room. It brings us to a harsh but necessary lesson tonight. Heals. A safe haven is never just handed to you by the world. It is a fortress you have to carve out and fiercely protect with your own two hands. Heals. Stick with me, because you and I need to unpack this final moment. Out of sheer willpower, these two survivors built a sanctuary in the beating heart of a gang war. The violence on those wet streets will never end, but by standing shoulder to shoulder, Heals, they created an impenetrable fortress. This diner proves that even the most brutal men can rewrite their own ending. It shows us that holding a man accountable and offering him irrational mercy are often the exact same thing. Heals. They chose a quiet truce instead of a bloody grave, and that brings us to the final truth of the night. Real power is never measured by how many bones you can break. Heals. True strength is found in having the patience and grace to slowly glue the shattered pieces back together.